On this Friday, Grayson earlier today with the note that Semu Taumanupepe, defensive lineman nose tackle from A&M, has committed to play for Dave Aranda and Baylor. Did I get that about right, Grayson?
I mean, the way that I've heard is pretty similar to that. I think it's Taumanupepe is how you say his last name. But either way, I mean, massive addition. I mean, this was one of the first guys that this Baylor staff got on campus. We're talking about a position that is a major need, not only going into next year because they lose Linus Noel, but I also think it's kind of been a position that's been a bit of a revolving door for Baylor a lot since Apuika left. And now you're getting a guy that has 3 years of eligibility. So you have an opportunity here to solidify the position for 3 years. He's 6'3", 350 pounds, so very similar to what everyone saw with Apu when he first got to Baylor. And he's just one of those guys that, I mean, he's going to anchor this defensive line. He's going to be very hard to move. He's going to eat up double teams and really allow these linebackers to thrive even more. So this was a major position of need, a major focus for Baylor. This gives them a much better opportunity at having a more well-rounded defense and specifically be able to stop the run at a higher level.
Yeah, that was something they weren't great at, Grayson, as you know. They weren't terrible at it, but they could have been better. And he's a run stuffer. So where else did they go after this? What's the need, like, when the portal closes and they open their eyes where they say, we have to have this?
Definitely a couple positions that I have in mind there. I think the first two that my eyes go to immediately are edge and wide receiver. Those are the first two that really stand out. Obviously, at edge, Baylor's going to lose Steve Linton and Garmin Randolph, two guys that were very productive for Baylor this year. And honestly, I think we saw what happens when Baylor's defense has guys who are true difference makers there. And Steve Linton at times this year just kind of jumped off the screen. So losing him, you're going to have to find guys to replace some of that production and some of that, quick twitch athleticism off the edge. They're going to have to find some guys to kind of come in and solve that problem. At wide receiver, I mean, it's pretty obvious. You look at the depth chart, it's basically Josh Cameron and then a lot of guys who haven't played a lot. I know the staff has very high hopes in Jaden Porter. I do as well, but he's still a young guy who's just going to be in his second year next season. So a lot to replace there. They do have Michael Trigg, who gives them obviously an option there at tight end and in the slot, but they need more wide receivers, more weapons for Sora Robertson to throw the ball to. Josh Cameron's a very good one, but they need more proven commodities there. So I think that's another position that I'm definitely keeping my eye on. Outside of that, I mean, they're probably going to take a linebacker. That seems very obvious up to this point, as they've already had a visitor on campus at that position. Cornerback seems likely, and then I think safety seems rather likely as well. So still a lot of needs to fill out, a lot of things that I'm definitely looking at. Offensive line is another one, probably going to take at least one there. So lots of different moving parts here, and I think that's going to lead to a fun next couple weeks.
Grayson, since you and I last talked, been a couple more additions to the transfer portal. Can't remember if we were talking about Carmelo Jones or not. I don't know if that had been official, but he jumps in the transfer portal. Jonah Burton, I don't think that's much of a surprise, but just saw Jacquez Evans entered the transfer portal as well. So just any thoughts on those guys, and I guess Evans being the latest. I know that there was hopes he was going to be impactful last year, and just obviously there's changes going on. So your thoughts on the latest changes to the roster?
Decisions have to be made. And I mean, he sat out this year to maintain his eligibility. And so now there's this opportunity for him to get another year back and play college football. And unfortunately for him, he just was hurt all year. And that's not to say that he would have had this massive impact, but I do think he would have had more of an impact had he not gotten hurt. So then it became a thing where, he might as well sit out and have a full healthy year. But then on the flip side, the discussion and the decision for Baylor is, well, do you just run it back, or do you go try to find an upgrade from the portal? And I think that's where, some of this is kind of a back and forth on the decision process, right? Jacquez Evans obviously trying to find another year, whether that's at Baylor or somewhere else, and Baylor trying to figure out their scholarship situation, figure out, where their needs are and what they want to utilize those spots on. It's kind of one of those things. He wasn't very productive in his 1 year at Baylor. A big part of that is injury related, but some of it is just getting passed up, by other guys on the roster. So tough to see, he didn't really, make the impact that I think many people were hoping for. So that's one. Jonah Burton, not really a surprise. I'm sure he wants to get on the field and play more. Carmelo Jones, another one, wanted to get on the field and play more. I think just kind of most of these guys are just buried on the depth chart, and that's kind of been the story for the guys who have left Baylor. Baylor's done a really good job of keeping guys who they want to keep, and that has continued so far this offseason.
Grayson, it was about this time last year, correct me if I'm wrong, when GXG ramped up a lot and they started to renew players because there were thoughts about Caden Jenkins, who might have been the very first one that they were able to kind of get to and get him confirmed for next year. And there were others, and it looked like that, like the rats were jumping off a ship type of thing. Have they already done that with those who were a part of the team that had the nice run at the end? Have they taken care of those? Do you even do that during the season, or is that something you do now?
Based on what I've heard, those conversations and those kind of, decisions have already been made. Lots of those conversations were happening right as the season ended. Some of those conversations were happening earlier. But I would say that I think Baylor's done a really nice job being proactive, right? Being proactive with their current roster, proactive with the guys that they absolutely know they need to keep. And then also being proactive with just the whole roster, right? Because you got to let guys know where they stand so they can kind of figure out, do they want to stay at Baylor? Do they want to jump into the portal, go find another option? But yes, those conversations have been had so that, and I think it's important, right, that Baylor had those conversations so that when you go into this transfer portal period, you kind of know who's on your roster and kind of what you're working with and the areas you need to address. And the conversations that you had, kind of off of those conversations, then kind of, acting on those through the transfer portal. And so I think those are some of the things that were very important to do before the transfer portal opened. And based on what I've heard, I think Baylor's done a really nice job of, solidifying a lot of things with their roster.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Stickem365.com, lead recruiting analyst, co-host of the Bearcast with us.
Grayson, what do you think the plan is at backup quarterback overall? Sawyer Robertson is locked in. Obviously, they've got true freshmen coming in. But do you think that A&M went and got Jacob Zeno? I think their plan is for him to be the backup quarterback. Is there someone like that maybe in the offing for the Bears?
I think that so for me, that's kind of a decision that I feel like the staff's going to have to go through and make. For me, I would probably take another quarterback. I just, as much as I like Nate Bennett and Edward Griffin, who's going to be a true freshman that's early enrolling, I just think it's nice to have another veteran in the room, especially as you kind of go into this season with all these expectations. It just would be really tough if you do lose Sawyer, and then let's just say these young guys aren't quite ready, and then you kind of lose the season. You know what I mean? And so I just feel like having a guy that's had more experience and who can at least ride the ship a little bit if Sawyer does miss some time could be very valuable for Baylor. So now I will say I think that those decisions, honestly, for a backup quarterback, I think there's a situation where Baylor just waits until spring. Because you got to remember, a lot of these guys are still going into their, programs this year, and they're going to battle it out during spring football, and then decisions are going to be made, and the transfer portal opens again there. And so Baylor could have an opportunity post-spring to go figure out that backup quarterback position, and it would give them time to watch Nate Bennett and Edward Griffin and kind of see, where those guys are at. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now on that process. I think it's one that I've been kind of keeping an eye on, and I do think that as of right now, I would tell you, I think that makes a lot of sense to add one. But I also think being patient and waiting out the process is not a bad decision either.
What's your thoughts on the Texas Bowl selection and just the amount of LSU transfer portal entries that we've seen? And can this program kind of block out LSU doesn't want to be there and this is a layup, and, kind of block out that and take this game the same way they've taken all of their games and ensure that whether LSU's weakened or not, like in 10 years, it's going to say you beat LSU. And that's all that people are going to be curious about. Not that like the backup left tackle didn't play or something. So Grayson, do you think they have the ability to kind of block that out and take this as though they're playing like Joe Burrow basically there for the Tigers?
The way they've played during the back half of the year tells me that they're going to show up in this game and really be ready to try to win it. I think there's a sense with this team, and you get it a lot of times in college football where teams go on a run and the run is great, but then they also go to the bowl game and take care of business. And that really, kind of gives you the momentum and propels you into the next season. It feels like that's kind of where Baylor is trending at right now, that they're kind of just going to continue pushing this wave into the offseason. Now, that doesn't mean that LSU is just going to roll over. I mean, they got Garrett Nussmeier coming back. He announced that. So I think he's playing in the bowl game. And when you have a really good quarterback like that, a guy that's got NFL talent, I mean, he could go in there and put up 30-something points on you, and then all of a sudden it's a really close game, or maybe you lose it. And then on the flip side, LSU also has a lot of talented guys. And so it's important to remember that even though they're losing guys, LSU is very talented. They recruit at a very high level. It's a blue blood program. It's a program that's had a lot of success, has a lot of tradition, and I don't expect them to roll over in Houston. And so that means Baylor's going to have to show up, play really well. I do think if Baylor shows up and plays like they have over the last 6 weeks, I think they're going to win this game. But I think in general, it's just a great opportunity for this Baylor program, and they need to take advantage of it.
All right, so we know that Sam Houston State's got a list, including Matthew Pallage, who's there. That's where he's from. His family is from. Obviously, Rashard Samples is a nice name in that mix. That depends on who you see and who you talk to. I think Pallage will be thrilled to have the opportunity. I also think he likes being at Baylor. He's been there twice. Do they have somebody you think already in mind? In fact, if Pallage takes the job or is offered and takes the job at his alma mater?
I think that they probably have someone in mind. I'm not really sure where they would go, though. I don't have specific names in mind that they would probably go after to replace Pallage, but I'm sure Dave Rand has a list of guys that he would like to go and get to be the safeties coach. I would also say that, there were 6 names mentioned by Dave Texas football. So it's a very open competition. It feels like it's actually a pretty impressive list for Sam Houston. I think in general, they're probably going to end up with a pretty good coach. Rashad Samples, like you mentioned, seems like the hot name there. Sean Bell was also mentioned as one of the top 6 candidates as well, which is obviously that's news for Baylor fans, as he was at Baylor for a while. And then now is obviously the quarterback coach at Houston. But I think in general, if Pallage does take this job, it's great for him, right? For him to get a head coaching opportunity, for him to advance in his career. That's awesome. I think the Baylor staff would love that for him. And then on the flip side, I think Baylor's definitely going to have a list, and they're going to have a list of names that they want to go after if Pallage does leave. And we're kind of in wait and see mode on that, though.
Last thing, everybody's adding right now. Not a lot, but there are people who are adding more than others, and then they'll do it again at the first of the year and after spring drills or spring practices. Is there somebody that Baylor really wanted? You mentioned the defense nose tackle from A&M. Was there somebody else out there early on who's in the portal that Baylor wanted that they missed on?
I mean, I think if you're going to go through just guys who visited, I mean, they had UCF transfer cornerback Chasen Johnson on campus. He ended up committing to USC, I believe, yesterday or a couple days ago. So I think there was clear interest there, right? I think that for Baylor, the other part about this is there's a fine line, right? Like if you're going to spend all your NIL on, a player or 2 players, it's going to be kind of difficult. You have to make those decisions. So I think there were a lot of guys who Baylor looked at and who Baylor likes, but also they're not going to blow all their NIL money on 1 or 2 guys, right? They need to spread it out. They got multiple positions they need to address. So as you see some of these higher name guys, I think Baylor did try to get in on some of them. And then there's still some out there who Baylor is in on. And I think that's the give and take, right? Through the NIL and through transfer portal process, you're going to have a lot of conversations with a lot of agents, with a lot of different people to kind of figure out, what does the prospect want? What does the kid want? What's kind of the priority? And I think Baylor's kind of trying to go through that process. And honestly, they've been very quiet through the process as well. If you follow a lot of national guys, you're not seeing a lot of reporting on Baylor right now. I mean, I think a part of that is because Baylor is playing a patient game, but they've also, in my eyes, identified a lot of their top targets. And now it's just about getting those guys on campus and then going from there. But they're not trying to get their name out there. They're not trying to tell everyone who they're recruiting. They're not trying to, say that, oh, we're recruiting at this high level. They're just kind of taking it day by day, and they're going to get the prospects that they want. And I've been honestly pretty impressed by that, because if you look across the country, I mean, almost every program has been mentioned a lot by national writers, and Baylor's one of the ones that truly hasn't been very much.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Enjoy the weekend. The story from earlier today on a monstrous nose tackle from A&M, and Baylor gets him. Brought back memories of Siaka Ika Apu, as they called him, from LSU, who was a phenomenal player for them for a couple of years.